Welcome to She Said Homestead, the podcast that explores homesteading from a range of perspectives. We're Sage and Mickayla, two homesteaders, each with unique experiences, properties, and future goals for our homesteads. We're discussing various homesteading topics, sharing our personal experiences as women working full-time who are managing homesteads as well, and shining a light on the stories of other inspiring homesteaders.
Before we dive in, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you enjoy our podcast, please consider leaving a review. It really helps us grow and share these homesteading stories with even more people.
Hey there guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Mickayla from Calico Cow Acres.
And I'm Sage from Terra Nova Acres, and we both have homesteads in Western North Carolina.
Today we're going to be talking about how homesteading has changed how we eat. But before we get into that, why don't you tell me about your week, Sage?
This is, at least for me, officially the start of the season where every time I go up to the garden, I think, I don't need my basket. I don't have anything to harvest. And then I get to the garden and I'm like, dang, I really should have brought my basket because now I have a pile of food. And the best way to carry it is do that awkward shirt apron thing and stretch my shirt out or, drop stuff. And so that's cool. I feel like I've been waiting to hit that for a while, and just because of the weird weather patterns this year, it seems later to me, but I could also be just making that up in my head. It's officially hitting the swing of harvest season. I canned my first tomatoes, so that's a big deal. I'm starting to actually get what at least feels like the, armload of harvest now. And my first cafe au lait dahlia bloomed yesterday, which is also a big deal because that's my favorite flower. And I wait all year for that, and they only bloom for like 2 or 3 months out of the year, and then I have to wait to see them again. So that's really fun. And I also bought a different kind of canning jar to mess around with now that harvest stuff is coming in. It's something that I have thought about for a long time, and I'll do this with lots of things in my life, right? Like I'll sit on it and I'll think about it, but I won't do anything about it. And then one day I just wake up and I'm like, I feel like doing that today. So I bought a whole bunch of, they're called WEC canning jars, and they're basically the standard in Europe, whereas ball canning jars are the standard in America. And they work mostly the same, but they have all kinds of sizes, and they are more expensive to get here. But I think they're more aesthetic, and they're cool because you can stack them, and I like that the top is glass too. So there's a few different reasons that I decided to go for it, but that was cool. Last night was my first venture into canning with those, and so far so good. I think I like them, but we'll see.
Yeah, it is not just you. I feel like my garden has definitely started to produce those like shirtfuls in the last week or so. I'm kind of in the same boat, and it's really weird. I was kind of panicking. Like, you guys have probably experienced me saying this over the last 2 months every week. I don't know what's happening with my tomatoes. Like, oh, they're finally doing this, they're finally doing that, they're sad, they're happy. It's been a roller coaster, but I also feel like the tops of my plants are starting to grow really well and they're looking healthy, and so I'm actually seeing tomatoes. And at this point last year, my tomatoes were like done and getting just demolished by leaf-footed bugs. So now they're starting to come in right when the leaf-footed bugs are also here. I don't necessarily know that that's a good thing. They're all like really scarred and stuff, but I have noticed that too, where I'm finally starting to get to bring in little shirtfuls of things, and that's exciting. And also, I am very jealous of your WEC jars. I have also wanted those for years. Honestly, just for even like dry goods storage, they're beautiful, and I think they're really cool. And I have not wanted to invest in them in the past because they are quite expensive, but maybe someday we'll get to some of those.
Yeah, and of course, it's right when I get to the point with my ball jar stash that I feel like I have enough to work with to preserve, and I've been doing what seems like nothing but just buying canning jars since I started homesteading, and I get good with the ball jars, and now I'm like, I'm just gonna switch to WEC jars instead. Right? Of course I would do that.
I thought I wasn't gonna have to buy jars this year, but I am definitely gonna have to buy jars this year.
But that means you're putting more food away, so it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. Yep. No, I'm not sad about it. Like, eventually there will be a point where I'm like, why do I have this many jars? I have too many jars. And that will be a good day.
That day is not today.
No, not today.
I'm also determined to not be late on my fall garden this year. So I had started some fall garden seeds the week previous, and now those needed to be potted up. So I blocked up my brassicas. I call it blocking up because I use soil blocks. Blocked up the brassicas. I potted up some cucumbers because I'm determined to at least try to have some cucumbers this year. And the spring ones didn't do it, so fall is my last hope. And I did something a little crazy where I started carrots in soil blocks because I've had such horrible luck with carrots that at this point I'm like, I don't care what crazy thing I have to do to get carrots. I'm going to get carrots. So I germinated them inside in the, I think it's 3/4 inch soil blocks, which are tiny, tiny. And then I transplanted all those out over the course of a couple days. So we'll see how those go. I actually meant to check on them today and I forgot, but I'm sure they're still there. Yeah, threw some succession, potatoes in the ground, that kind of stuff. And also pre-ordered some fall flower bulbs because I was in a spree of getting organized for fall stuff. So I was like, throw that in there too. So I feel like I'm prepared for fall gardening, but famous last words.
Doing things ahead of time and like getting yourself to the point is a huge part of the task for me. A lot of the times I like realize I wanted to do something and it's in the middle of when I should already be like getting it in the ground, or it should already be in the ground, and I panic order it. And I'm like, oh, well, I don't have time to do this for a few more weeks, and then it never gets planted. So you're ahead of schedule, and that's not a bad thing.
I think I'm ahead of last year's schedule, which just means I'm on time.
This week was another week for me where Taylor was gone still, and he just got back yesterday, actually. So I was on my own for 2 weeks here, and honestly, I feel like I didn't even do a whole lot, but I am just exhausted, like making sure everything was taken care of on my own and then working still, and yeah, just like being by myself. I feel like I need a week off of life in general. So I'm really tired, like physically, mentally, all of the things. But I did manage to get some projects done while he was gone. So I don't know if I mentioned this last week, I can't remember, but I started to citrus strip and like remove all the paint from our fireplace, which is one of the most difficult jobs I think I've ever done. It is so labor intensive and it's not easy. So it took me like 5 nights to get, I'm probably like almost halfway done with it. 5 nights as in like 6+ hours a night working on it. I'm almost halfway done. There's a lot of scraping involved. So it looks really good and it looks super cozy and it's going to be worth it. And I have to get it done before we get floors in because it's really messy and sticky and just like gross and kind of, there's a lot of water involved. So I don't want to do it. I want to do it before we get floors, but I'm ready for it to be done. I did that, and then I also impulse painted our base cabinets in the kitchen, which I showed you. But we had to get paint for the camper because we're gonna start like getting that ready to sell, and we have guests coming to stay in it. So I have cabinet paint like for all the casework in there, and it's like a sage green color. And I was like, this would look really pretty in the kitchen, and I have way more than I need for the camper. And so I painted the base cabinets in our kitchen. It looks really nice.
That sounds pretty similar to me last year because I also impulse painted my kitchen cabinets last year. And it was also like this time of year when I had absolutely no business signing myself up for another project. So you and I exist on the same wavelength most of the time.
It was an inside project next to the air conditioning. And honestly, it was one of the easiest projects I've tackled lately, so I'm not sad about it. It looks nice. I feel like I'm on this roll with house things because we are like he just got back, so he's going to be working on the joists again. As soon as the joists are done, we're going to work on drywall, getting that finished, and then once the drywall is done, we can get floors. And I finally, as of my last paycheck, have saved up enough to buy floors. So I'm super excited. And I'm just like pumped up to have a nice house, like finally. So I'm like really into the house things right now. And our bedroom, I got these picture frames a few months ago to go up behind our bed because we have a window behind our bed, but it's just like a skinny window above my head. And so it looks really out of balance. And so I wanted to get picture frames to balance it out a little bit. I got the frames. I used the citrus strip to get the stain off of them so they're like not orange brown. And I ordered prints for them and I got them all hung up on my own. I added like the little hanger things on the back and everything, and it looks so nice and it feels so cozy in there. I got a new throw blanket for our bed, and that's honestly, yeah, everything just feels really cozy. And I know that you're not into me saying this, but I'm so ready for fall. I'm ready for fall because I am exhausted. I am ready for the hot to be gone. It's starting to cool down a little bit, so like I'm getting in that like headspace. By the time this episode comes out, it's going to be September, and so I feel like it's a little bit more acceptable. But I have my orange blanket. I'm ready for fall. I'm giving in.
I drove by a tree today, a maple tree, and it was starting to have a hint of color, and I was like, I am just getting used to the fact that it's summer. Please don't start changing the leaf colors. I cannot handle this. And yeah, by the time this airs, like I'll be in that headspace. But right now, the very beginning of August, I'm just barely starting to get my harvest. I'm like, wait, don't rush through, because I'm not a winter person. I spend all winter wishing I could skip it, other than being able to rest.
We started watching Gilmore Girls again like a few weeks ago I saw your shirt. Nice shirt. I need it. And that got me back into the mood. I was like, okay, I'm ready. I don't even care what the date is on the calendar. Give me a warm coffee and a cozy blanket, light a fall candle, and I'm ready. I also think it's partly because I haven't really been getting a ton of harvest, so I'm just like, okay, I'm over this. Like, I'm sick of it. I'm ready for the 70, 60 degree weather. But I also appreciate winter here a lot. After living my entire life with Michigan winters, winter here feels like fall. So I like winter here. But I'm not wishing away summer. I am just physically exhausted, and I'm ready for going into the season of rest, I think. The last thing on my list was Red. Our friend Red came over and she wanted to learn how to can. So I spent all day Saturday with her here. She brought baskets full of pears, almost said peaches, baskets full of pears from her property that like they grew there. And I showed her how to water bath can, and then I also canned some chickpeas while she was here to show her how to pressure can. So we spent all day doing that, and that was fun. It was fun to hang out and have another person in person to talk to after 2 weeks of being by myself. So that was cool. I enjoyed that. And I hope that she feels confident doing that on her own now. I sent her home with some because we didn't have enough time to can all of them. So I was like, you have homework. Hopefully you feel comfortable doing this on your own now.
That's awesome. So they had established pear trees on the property they moved on to?
Yeah, they have like a little orchard there, and I think most of the trees are really sick, she said, and not like they haven't been well maintained, and they're trying to get them back into shape or deciding if they need to take them out. But yeah, they had a handful of established ones there, which is really cool. Wait, one more thing. I also remembered last week I mentioned that I was working on my tomatoes that I got from the farm store. And I finally have a total count on how many quarts of tomato sauce I got out of those.
Oh my god. Okay.
My goal was 21 quarts, and I got 24 quarts.
Nice.
So, that's more than I did last year. I did 22 last year, and we still have some left over after rationing it a bit. So I think that'll be good.
I have not bought anything in bulk, but so far I have 1 quart of tomatoes put away. Yay!
Celebrating.
I know, I was joking with somebody earlier, and I was like, no, I just need to do that like 30 more times, and I'll be set for the year.
I really hope the tomatoes start rolling in for both of us, because I was like assuming it was a lost cause this year. But they're looking like they might turn themselves around.
I remember kind of panicking last year when it hit August, and I was like, I haven't gotten as many tomatoes as I feel like I should. And then mid to late August, and then early to mid September was just nothing but tomatoes, it felt like. So, again, going back to I keep feeling like it's late, but it's probably just on par, and I'm impatient, which that checks out. So I think we'll both end up with more from our garden than we think we will.
Also, I think you should do cucumbers, because my cucumbers that I just planted are doing infinitely better, and they're growing a lot faster than the ones I planted earlier in the spring.
Yeah, I got new seed packets, so for both pickling and like a muncher cucumber, and I sowed, I don't know, like 2 dozen. I'm determined. I don't need 2 dozen cucumber plants worth of cucumbers, but I will gladly give them away if I have too many, right? So I'm going to keep them inside and baby them as long as I can, and I'm going to put them out when the time is right, and just cross my fingers. If you could only use one word to describe your eating habits, eating structure, now that you homestead, what would it be?
Can I use 2 words?
I'll allow it.
Okay. Pre-planned chaos.
Mm.
Those are my 2 words. How about you?
I think impulsive would be the best way to sum it up, for sure. Which, double-edged sword, because sometimes I'm impulsive and I'm like, I want tiramisu for dinner, and sometimes it's I have a stash of vegetables on the counter, and impulsive is just using what I have and what I need to use anyway. So sometimes it works in my favor, and sometimes I feel like an 8-year-old with adult levels of autonomy.
So my first initial thought was, for me, was going to be the word erratic, and I feel like that also tracks. I feel like those both go together really well. I do like to plan things, but I don't always follow my plan.
Would you say that you've always eaten that way, or has it evolved from something else?
I would say as an adult, like since living on my own, my trend of meals towards those terms, I would say that's pretty accurate, because I've always been somebody who likes to plan things, but I'm also super impulsive sometimes with like what I'm craving. If I need something like sweet or salty in the moment, I'm gonna eat it even if it doesn't really match my plan. I will search it out in my cabinet and I will find something that satisfies that craving. But as a child, I don't really know. I wasn't involved in the process of that. So I don't really know if my parents had meal plans necessarily. I assume that my mom did a little bit, because she did like couponing and stuff a lot. But there were like standard meals that I can think back and I remember her making, or my dad making, these specific things. And then separately from that, there are a lot of things that I remember making myself, because I babysat my brother and his friends and whatnot from like a pretty young age. Like we were home alone a lot because both my parents worked, especially during the summer. So like growing up, we would have like homemade meals, but I feel like they were made out of a lot of processed things. Like it's like box meals where you like add stuff to them, or it would be a lot of casseroles and things. So like ham and scallop potatoes, chicken casserole, pot roast is something my dad used to make all the time. I remember we always had steak, and it was cut up into like small bite-sized pieces and way overcooked with red potatoes, and it was just like a whole stick of butter in the red potatoes, which, I mean, delicious. Spaghetti, which I would never eat. I would only eat the Parmesan, like the shake Parmesan with the butter noodles. Lasagna. Barbecue chicken, beef stroganoff, rotisserie chicken from the store, dipped in ranch, rice pilaf, hamburger helper, and chili. Those are like the main meals that my parents made for me. I sat here and thought about this for a long time today, because I was like, what were these staples that we had all the time? I can also tell you that almost half of those things are things I would refuse to eat at least part of because I was such a picky eater. If my mom tried to branch out from those things, like, I actually really feel for her. I was probably horrible to try and feed as a kid. I was so picky. I have horrible texture issues. I know the reasons why that is now, but I didn't, and she didn't know the reasons behind that. I would make myself homemade fresh pico de gallo all the time. Ramen, packaged ramen, Maruchan ramen, Kraft mac and cheese, pizza rolls, Totino's pizzas. I was really good at making beef stew for myself, not just like the canned kind. I actually made it in the crock pot. And my specialty was fried egg sandwiches. And I remember pouring like vegetable oil, like a layer, like a half-inch thick of vegetable oil into the little pan, waiting for it to heat up, and then like cracking my egg into it. And I'm like, why didn't I just use butter? Now that I think about that, like, why did I waste so much oil? Why did I use the oil? Why did I not just use butter? I think about that every time I make eggs. So I feel like overall, I obviously made myself a lot more packaged foods than what my parents were making me for dinner. But I still feel like there had to have been some thought put into like the stuff that was available in the pantry for either them or me to make. So I think that kind of tracks, even though at that point it wasn't me planning it.
For me as a kid, I'm not aware of my mom ever making full meal plans. Like, she might have, taken 20 minutes and written down a grocery list, but it wasn't, pulling recipes and referencing them and doing that whole thing. It's kind of, we more had our routine or basic things that we would always keep around. Like, there was always going to be chicken that week, probably white meat. There was always going to be broccoli, having black beans and rice in the pantry to throw that together whenever, sweet potatoes, yellow squash, that stuff, whenever it was purchased, was always getting eaten. Honestly, it was less these, cohesive meals that have one name, and it was a lot more your protein, your 3 veggie sides, and that's your meal. I don't know if that's a Southern thing. I don't know where that comes from, but that's much more normal to me than making, a dish that you can call like lasagna or whatever. But there were things that she had that we really enjoyed, like chicken chop suey was always everybody's favorite. It was always so good. I don't know how she made it. I couldn't even try to recreate it, but there were also, recipes that she would repeat just because everyone appreciated. But yeah, I was fortunate enough to grow up in a house where my mom pretty much cooked everything. We went out to eat every once in a while, but 99% of it was eating at home, good homemade food. And honestly, I feel like one of the only reasons that I am able to enjoy cooking the way that I do now is because I wasn't forced to help her. That was never put on me. I was always setting the table for dinner. There were chores associated with being in the house and helping out, but it was never, you have to learn how to cook, come cook with me, or come make dinner. I actually really appreciate that, because one of the best ways to make me hate something is to tell me to do it. I will hold a grudge and make sure that I never enjoy it ever again.
I don't know if it's just my family like trying to get something on the table because my parents worked weird shifts and stuff for work, but we always had a lot of very specific meals where they were like lasagna because we could make it the day beforehand, or it was in the freezer, or something in the crock pot all day while we're all at work and school, or my dad's asleep because he worked third shift. So there was a lot of like those specific meals for that reason, I think. And there wasn't a lot of like meat with a side of veggies or whatever, because not that I remember. Maybe there was and I just don't remember it, but I remember a lot of those specific meals because they were easy things to like throw together. Going into like adulthood, like out of just like getting out of high school or like moving out on your own, did that transition for you at all, or did you kind of take on that role for yourself of making food and like learning how to cook for yourself?
Right. So because I had not been practiced at cooking, I wasn't a stranger to the kitchen. I have always enjoyed baking. Like I knew how to make things, but baking and cooking are two very different things. And so I kind of knew my way around the kitchen, but also it still felt foreign, if that makes sense. Like both of those things can simultaneously exist. And so yeah, when I moved out when I was in college, one, absolutely did not have money to just go be eating out all the time, right? and and two, growing up eating the way that I did, I enjoyed healthy food. It wasn't this contentious thing where I felt like I had to eat a certain way. It's just I enjoy eating more vegetables than usually you get when you go to eat out. I can be a little bit sensitive to salt. I can be a little bit sensitive to sugar. And that stuff is really easy to control when you're making food for yourself. Now, up until that point, I was lucky enough that my mom was making it for me. And then, yeah, when I moved out, I was like, okay, I have to figure out how to make this work because I'm also busy at school. And so I've got to do at least 3 meals for myself every day. And that's a challenge. Yeah. Going from not having to think about it, good, healthy food just being prepared for you, to it's on you now. You have to think about it. You have to grocery shop for it. You have to make it. That's a big swing. So yeah, I did a lot of just keeping vegetables around and making whatever I could think of out of it. What about for you? I mean, it sounds like you were already cooking for yourself a little bit, so it wasn't as foreign to you as maybe it was to me once you were on your own and having to make your own meals.
Throughout high school, most of high school, I was dating one person, and his mom made a lot of homemade meals, and she kind of taught me how to cook, and I started to appreciate cooking a little bit more because of that. And she would always serve like an appetizer, like salad, and they would have like the courses and stuff. So I kind of got into cooking a little bit more, learning homemade meals from her. And we had moved out into our first apartment when I was like 18, 19-ish. And my boyfriend at the time was super into like going to the gym, fitness, and I was like, I know the food that I grew up eating isn't necessarily like, I was realizing that wasn't the most healthy stuff because a lot of it was just frozen food or just prepackaged like Hamburger Helper, that kind of stuff from the store. And so I was really interested in making more homemade food. And so we kind of, at that point in time when we moved out, started to cook together and learn how to cook like in our own little crappy apartment kitchen. So we started to incorporate a lot more of those types of meals that you said you grew up with, where it's like meat and a few sides of vegetables. And then we would go to the gym later at night, and I don't know, just overall trying to be a little bit more conscious about it. I feel like that really got me into cooking more, but also starting architecture school at that point, the time commitment that I had for that plus working part-time was absolutely draining on me. I would still say it's probably the most stressful like 4 or 5 years of my life. It was really, really difficult, and I had to learn how to keep my house clean and cook food and have actual meals while also doing 6 classes, the max amount of credits that I could, and also working 20 plus hours a week and doing homework. So I was doing a lot of crock pot meals, and I feel like a lot of the times crock pot meals can be very simple and very nourishing if you want them to be. And so crockpot meals were kind of my fallback at that point. So I feel like I was pretty planned out with groceries because we were on a strict budget. You know, we're broke college kids, but we want to eat healthy, and that seemed like the way to go because we were also saving a lot of time. So the crockpot was my best friend in college.
Yeah, also something that honestly I tend to forget about is at that time I was also vegetarian. So that started in high school. And then I think I also transitioned into not only So I went from omnivore to vegetarian to vegan in high school. I was vegan for probably a total of 2.5, 3 years, and then went back to vegetarian after that, and then even back to omnivore after that. So it started in high school and ended in college, but there were multiple years there where I was not eating meat. I felt good when I was doing it. I only stopped doing it because I started asking more of my body. I started doing things like working out really hard and weightlifting and things like that, and it felt natural to me to change what I was eating when I changed what I was asking of my body. And honestly, if I went back to a lower demand lifestyle, I might go back to vegetarian. I tend to eat very intuitively. I don't really care whether it's widely perceived as something that's good to do or not. If I feel good doing it, I'm going to do it for myself. So that's another component. That's another way that just throughout my life in general, my diet has changed. And honestly, that was mostly provoked by my concern for ethical meat and animal products. It was initially motivated by, I'm going to do this and see if I feel good doing it.
So about 6 years ago now, I went vegetarian for kind of the same reasons. I was starting to, it was mostly ethical. I was feeling guilty every time I ate meat. And I don't know if we've talked, I feel like we have to have talked about this at some point in past episodes. I can't remember at this point. But I was starting to feel guilty every time I ate meat. And I wasn't feeling good about it. So I was like, okay, well, I'll just stop eating meat. Like, that's fine. I was to the point in my cooking and like learning how to make meals journey that I was ready for more of a challenge, and that seemed like a fun challenge at the time. And so I was like, okay, like we'll just learn how to do it and see if we can do it, see if I like it. And I ended up being vegetarian for 5 years at that point. Like, I started doing it for only my meals. So my breakfast and lunch, I would make vegetarian meals. And then for dinner, we'd have something. Like, I'd make something for Taylor and I, because we were dating at that point. That was like an omnivore meal. And then he also decided to join me in that 6 months later. And so we went full vegetarian after that for 5 years. Taylor is still vegetarian. That was definitely an interesting challenge, and it has continued to like be a challenge as that has changed, because now I am not vegetarian and he still is. So like over time, that process of me being vegetarian, him not being vegetarian, then both of us being vegetarian, now me not being vegetarian and he still is, that whole process has been like a learning experience of how to manage meals, especially with like all of the moving we've done and living in the camper and starting the homestead. It's been a lot to figure out. So I feel like that the last 6 years, how I approach food has changed so much.
So it sounds like a lot of your experience has been not only cooking for yourself, but also cooking for maybe other people in the family, but also, you know, your partner at the time. Has there been a significant chunk of time where you've only had to worry about you, or is it always you plus other people?
Taylor graduated a year and a half before I did, and he lived in Detroit. So he was like 3 hours away. And so for the majority of the week, my last year and a half of school, like undergrad school, I was just cooking for me other than weekends. So for the most part, like 5 days, 6 days a week, I was just cooking for myself. And then he would come back every single weekend. He would drive 3 hours Friday night. And then I would meal prep for him every weekend. And he'd take it home to Detroit to have meals for the whole week. So yeah, I was kind of a mixture of both. But for the most part, it was just me for that at least year and a half.
Interesting. I feel like, I don't know, I've been in a few different long-term relationships where I've lived with whoever I'm dating. And I don't know, like, I might cook for you if I'm making a meal anyway, but I've definitely never had the experience where the dynamic of our relationship has been like the routine of me cooking food in general, or even just dinner. You know, I've been married before, and even in that circumstance, like, we just ate such different things that I didn't cook for him at all. I cooked for me. I was like, you do you, because you're gonna have a peanut butter sandwich for dinner, and I'm gonna have something completely different. Like, I don't even want to mess with it. So yeah, that's interesting. I don't know. Even in my last relationship, which was at the homestead, at least part of it, dinner was either collaborative, like we both made it, or if I made it one night, he would make it another night. Like, it was very much a trade-off, and that's how I like it. I enjoy cooking. For me personally, I don't think I could ever see me like being the cook in the way that my mom was, for example.
Yeah. I definitely think that in our relationship, I am the cook, but especially prior to moving here, we did make a lot of meals together. When we moved in with our friend Adam, that's kind of when it moved more to my plate, because I was in school and he was working full time. And so, like, I didn't have a job at that point. And so I kind of took on the role of just like making sure, like, my classes were a little bit more flexible than his job schedule. So I was just making sure we had food, because, like, I don't know, I would cook for all three of us, including our roommate. I don't know. Food is my love language. I like cooking for people a lot. Like, I really enjoy it. It makes me happy. But I do get burnout with it. So I have recently, like, been thinking about, I need to teach Taylor to do some of these things that I have, these skills that I've learned in the last few years, because a lot of it does fall on me. And I do, like, I've recently mentioned this, like, I miss cooking together, because we used to cook together all of the time when we were in school together. And then that kind of changed with all of the moving that happened. And we've just had a tumultuous, like, 5 years, honestly. So I would like to get back to that, because it is a lot of work with all the other stuff we've got going on. But we do kind of have our own, like, we have our separate projects. Like, he's always working on something else, but the cooking usually just ends up being like my project of the night.
Right. I mean, when you're in a partnership and you're busy, it makes sense to delegate and be like, you own that, I'll own this. And sometimes it almost feels like a luxury when you get to work together on things instead of just, parallel but separate. So I totally get that.
I think it would be fun to film as well. Like, I want to teach him how to do canning. Not that he would do that on his own, but I think that it would be fun, just one, for a video, but also so he knows that skill, and then, like, trying to get him back into the swing of, like, learning how to make his own vegetarian, like, meat substitutes and stuff, because then that doesn't necessarily have to fall on my shoulders if he needs something. If we wanted to do, like, a bulk prep day for all that stuff, like, it would be cool to have him help, and not me not having to, like, walk him through it fully. So that's definitely on the table as something we're going to do soon, like, get back into that. But it's an interesting dynamic.
So after I graduated college, I moved somewhat immediately from Georgia to Colorado. And when I moved to Colorado, I went and got a job. I was like, all right, time to figure out how to support myself. So it was finding that career job. It was also, still just trying to keep myself healthy for a lot of my life. That's been a main focus, and that's come in different forms. Sometimes, I was playing sports as my exercise. Sometimes I'm not doing, anything but, like, hiking for exercise. Sometimes I'm in the gym 6 days a week for exercise. It's evolved a lot, and I feel like the way that I feed my body has evolved with that. So when I was out of college, that's when I, for whatever reason, because we talk about this all the time, but I'm not capable of moderation. Like, I'm all into something or I'm all out of it. And I was like, I have got to be an organized person. I've got to be this, like, go-getter, like, do all the things and do them well. So I was like, I'm going to get my career job. I'm going to be super healthy. And because I was so busy, well, what I saw at the time is so busy. I have a different definition now. I was like, all right, in order to stay sane, like I have to meal prep. So I'm going to sit down. I'm going to figure out the actual recipes. I'm going to write out all the ingredients. I'm going to figure out my grocery list. I'm going to go to the store with a plan. I'm going to buy exactly that. And I'm going to come home and I'm going to spend an entire day making it. So like that used to be my Sunday, was grocery shopping. Well, waking up, take a hike, go grocery shopping, come back, cook the meals, clean the house. And then I'm like ready for the week. And that was really awesome. I felt amazing doing that. And maybe not to the same extent, but I would like to get back to that to some level, but that is absolutely just not how my life works right now. Not even close.
Okay, so when you say meal prepping, do you mean like portioning it out into the different bowls or like the different containers and like you have this much per day, like that type of meal prepping? Because that is not my type of meal prepping.
I mean, not to the point that I'm like weighing out the grams of protein and tracking the macros within whatever. Like I never took it to that level. But I would have I would save whenever I would get Asian food, I would save those to-go containers because they're always great for that, right? And I would put the piece of protein in there, I would put all the veggies in there, and then I would heat them back up in a pan or whatever and have that. And that was like, I didn't have to think about it after I put in the effort to think about it, once a week. And then I could just have it in the fridge. And whenever I'm hungry and I'm like, gosh, I don't know what to eat, just open the door and be like, oh yeah, right, I already did this for myself. Just grab it, heat it up, eat it. Don't have to think about it.
I think that's a really good tool, like a good process to do when you have a chaotic mind. Like I do personally, like that helps me a lot because that's exactly how I feel, where like even today, it was 2 p.m. and I was like, I have not eaten today just because I was so focused on what I was doing for work. And I was like, I've had 2 coffees and I haven't eaten today. I need to eat something. Like, I just forget. It's not even intentional. I don't like intentionally not eat sometimes. I just forget to eat. And that's just how my brain works. And so like being able to open up the fridge and knowing that I made breakfast hash yesterday for my lunches this week, all I have to do is crack 2 eggs into a skillet and like cook them, put them on top, and microwave the rest, and it's good. Like that is very helpful, and I feel like I would be a lot more prone to having to go back to like grabbing a box of mac and cheese or whatever, or starving until dinner if I wasn't that intentional about meal planning. Now I couldn't survive without it.
I used to think that. Yeah, and now I've devolved into the chaos that is my life now.
I will say, Taylor was gone the last 2 weeks, and as soon as he is gone and it's just me, I'm only relying on myself and I don't have to like show up for anybody. I turn into like a feral gremlin. Like, I'm just gonna eat watermelon today. Like, that's the vibe. I don't do any dishes, I don't pick anything up, and I just eat like whatever I can grab quickly because I get too engulfed in a project.
Sometimes you just need breaks like that because then it allows you to just like, one, take a deep breath, but then two, appreciate that routine after you've had a break from it, right? Like you're like, okay, enough watermelon. Getting back to my meal planning and my actual meals now. Like sometimes you just need some distance to let the food heart grow fonder.
Honestly, I genuinely cannot remember what I ate last week.
I just lived off of watermelon, that's it.
Literally, when I say that I ate watermelon last week, I mean I cut off like the top quarter of it and stuck a spoon into the rest of it and ate it like that. Like that is how I eat watermelon. I don't cut it.
I don't see anything wrong.
I did also have Reese's Puffs. I will say that. I was craving those. Like, this is my treat. This is my treat of the week. I ate watermelon and Reese's Puffs last week. One of the first things that I noticed that I can like look back and recognize that like that was a step towards me changing how I eat closest to like how I eat now is back when I was in my undergrad, we would have these little potlucks in our studio, which is like our classroom where our desks were. And we spent most of our lives there. And so we were there all the time. So we would do potlucks like once a week where we would all make something homemade and bring it in. And it would be like in the crock pot during class. And so that felt really special because it was like one of the first times when I recognized like the community and culture that can be around food, even if it's just 6 crock pots in a classroom that we like chow down after the teacher's done talking. That was something that was really cool to me. And I always made like crockpot mac and cheese or a beef stew or something. I fondly look back on that and think like, okay, this was me enjoying feeding people. And that's kind of something that really fed into how I am today with food. And another thing is we were all obsessed with the like easy artisan loaf, the yeasted bread loaf that takes like 3 hours to rise. And then it's just like this beautiful crusty loaf. Somebody made those almost 2 or 3 times a week. Like we would rotate, everybody would bring it in and we'd all just demolish it at the beginning of class. And I made those all of the time. That was my first YouTube video I ever posted, was how to make that loaf. And I still make those loaves on a date, like not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis.
I think for me, partially because I had always viewed food as a labor of love thing, I don't think mine came in quite the same way. I think my light bulb moment that kind of led to my relationship with food the way it is now was when I realized that it was actually possible for me to like do a lot more of it myself, because I enjoy doing pretty much anything I can manage to do myself. I enjoy doing it myself. I've cut my own hair since high school when I color it, which I haven't because it's the last thing I want to keep up with. Like I do it myself. There's a lot of things. I make my own soap. I don't know. There's so many things that I don't even think of that are normal to me now. And I think when I realized that I could not only cook my own food, but grow my own food, especially meat, you know, because it's not like my concern for ethical meat went away when I started eating meat again. I mean, I can make the best decision I can manage at the grocery store, but even that, one, is expensive, and two, labels can sometimes be intentionally misleading, which is a whole conversation in itself. But yeah, when I realized I can do that, and two, I realized I'm genuinely interested in all of the things that come along with that lifestyle, that was a cool moment.
So since you've had that moment of like realization and connection with food and like hobbies and realizing you enjoy all of these things, what is your general sentiment around food now?
I think that's a challenging question because even though this is my 3rd season here, you know, I've been here for, we'll call it 2.5 years, I feel like I'm still like thick in the middle of getting stuff set up. I feel like I don't have things quite to the level of switching from building to maintaining in order for me to really step back and have that more, I'll call it creative or peaceful or intentional relationship with food. Right now, like I'm just cramming the plants that I can cram in the garden. I'm harvesting what I can manage to harvest. I'm preserving whatever I can manage to preserve. I'm raising whatever animals I have the money and time and energy to chase after right now. So I would like to sit here and say, you know, oh, I've cultivated this awesome, amazing, ethical, sustainable relationship with food, but I very much feel like that is still in progress. So I'll get back to you on that one.
Well, I think at the end we can talk about our goals for it too. But I think it's a good thing to note early on in our homesteading journey where we're at right now, like what we're feeling and experiencing around food, because maybe in a few years from now that's completely different, but we still feel the same way, where we're not quite there where we feel like we're actually achieving these goals for ourselves with food, but it's completely different than it is now. So I think this is a good like snapshot in time to talk about this.
For sure. I mean, for me, going from meal prepping and being very intentional about every single meal I ate to throwing everything at trying to get this going, and as a side effect, my meals falling by the wayside, which is kind of an oxymoron, right? I went from being very organized, very planned to, being crashing at the end of the night because I haven't had enough food, and I've worked harder than I've ever worked and sweated more than I've ever sweated, and I don't have anything in the fridge to eat. And then it's falling back on, okay, well, I'm going to drive into town and grab whatever's open. Like the first year here, that was very normal. That was 3 to 4 nights a week, was just eating whatever I could get a hold of. And I feel like I'm working my way back to getting back to a meal planning place, which is where I would like to be, but have not managed to get there yet. And this year I've gotten a lot closer, but it's been survival since I've been at the homestead, to be really honest.
Do you think that having your foot in the corporate world and also the other in the homesteading world affects that a lot?
100%. If in some magical way, shape, or form, I did not have to keep up with a 9 to 5, I would be able to take care of myself significantly better. What about you?
Yeah, this is one of the main reasons that I wanted to do this episode topic, because I think that a lot of homesteading accounts that you see like on social media in any form, whether it's YouTube or Instagram or whatever, I feel like at least one of the people in those partnerships that are putting out content is like, it is their main job to be at home and maintaining the home and cooking meals and taking care of kids, homeschooling, whatever. And that is a lot of work. I am not trying to put that down whatsoever. That is a lot of work. There are reasons I do not have children yet, and that is one of them. I do not have the capacity for that. So props to anybody who's doing that. But I do feel like there is the potential for a little bit more flexibility and like setting your schedule with that and having little bits of time to accomplish things than what a 9 to 5 job or corporate job or whatever you're doing provides. And so I think having our perspective here, where we have truly been in and partially still are in like survival mode and trying to get this thing to work and figure it all out and get it to a point that's like maintainable and not pushing us to our limits, is a very valuable thing to put out in the world. And that seriously is like one of the main reasons I wanted to do this episode, because I think it's important for people to see that like you can homestead and it still can be a struggle, but you can do it. You can work your way through it if you really want to. And we're just in that process.
I think that's a fantastic point. And thank you for saying it more eloquently than I possibly could. But I'm curious, we've talked a lot about big picture, but getting into more specifics, how is your, ingredient list changed pre-homestead versus now that you homestead? What are the differences with what you're actually making meals out of?
I feel like I don't want to go through the entire list because there's just so much that I keep on hand, but I truly have tried to start building a stocked pantry. And I'm not saying this in like prepper terms where it's like I have Mylar bags full of 50 pounds of things down in my basement. My basement floods. I don't do that. I do, however, have a lot of things that I keep on hand in bulk for multiple reasons. And I try to stock things that I know I cook with often. I've been trying to transition, I guess, like one thing at a time. Just if I want to know how to make tortillas instead of buying them from the store one week, I just look up a recipe and I make the tortillas that week. And I save that recipe, and then I'll just try it a few times and see if I like it. And if I do like it, then I'll just make sure I have that, whatever I need in bulk to make those whenever I want them. So a lot of it has just been me acquiring skills and knowing that I can make those things, while also really trying to be realistic with myself, knowing that I can't always make those. And sometimes it's got to give. Most of the time, 95% of the time, I make all of our buns and bread and baked goods homemade. Sometimes, though, we go to the store and there's a clearance rack there, and they've got like everything garlic bread that I know I can make into like homemade garlic bread. So we'll buy that 90-cent bread or whatever. So it's definitely a balance. And I think I make a lot of similar meals to what I did previously, but I try and choose more organic ingredients now. I am a lot more conscious about the food labels and where I'm sourcing things and trying to buy things in bulk, not only because it's nice to have them on hand and it saves me money on my grocery bills every week, but it also is a little bit cheaper to buy things in bulk. The last year or so has been a lot different because I've started to incorporate meat again for myself. And so I feel like I've really, in the last year and a half, I've been craving trying to make meals from my childhood in a more healthy way, and things that we had at holidays, things that my great grandma would make, things that I just remember from childhood in like a very fond way. And when I was vegetarian, my challenge for myself was making those in a vegetarian way. And I definitely accomplished a lot of that. I think I've always been looking for that connection to my food, and like through family and nostalgia. And I feel like I'm really back to that, especially with starting to grow a lot of it myself. It feels like the connection is really solidifying.
On my side of things, and we've talked about this before, but one of the biggest changes was, instead of getting the 3-pack of chicken breasts off of the grocery store shelf, which is what I used to always do and was easy. Now that I harvest my own birds, I have to use all of that meat in those proportions. So I don't get to decide how many chicken breasts I get. I get, as many, twice as many chicken breasts as I get number of chickens. And I have to eat the chicken breast, but also the thigh, and then whatever other meat that I can get off of the bird, which I can eat it, right? I can make recipes out of that. It's just not something that I was used to, and it wasn't a default, and I honestly wouldn't do it if I wasn't raising my own animals. So figuring out how to use the whole animal in those proportions is new to me. And I also eat a lot more frozen or canned food now. Granted, it's food that I grew and food that I preserved. I never used to, default to the frozen section or default to canned vegetables. I would always just go to the produce section in the grocery store and pick up whatever I want, because we have that luxury, living where we are, where we can go to the produce section and even if it's not in season, it's probably there. So that is very different for me. That is something that I'm still having to shift my mindset to. Like, sometimes I'll forget that, yeah, it's December, but I have blanched and frozen green beans in the freezer, right? Like, I'm still working on remembering that I've put food away like that.
I also forget there are certain things in the freezer that I have and I can use and I don't have to buy from the store. And that is one reason I got an upright freezer earlier this year, because it's a lot easier to see the things. And I'm just such a visual person. I need to be able to see stuff. I think that's why I'm so good at using our canned goods, because I have them all on display. And as much as it pains me to use them because they're so pretty, I use them because I can just walk over to the other side of the kitchen and grab them. I don't have to dig through a freezer with my bare hands and freeze my fingers off trying to find something. I mentioned earlier that I still kind of eat intuitively, in the sense that, like, if I have a craving, I'm gonna figure out a way to satisfy it. Have you one, I guess, do you have cravings for things, and do you like have those changed throughout? Has that changed since you started growing your own food?
Okay, well, for one, if I don't have chocolate every single day, I will die. It is a scientific fact. So that has been consistent. I do keep dark chocolate around, or if I don't have some sort of dark chocolate bar, I'll make like a dark chocolate brownie cookie. It's one of my go-tos right now. It's really good. You know, something in that form. So I absolutely have cravings. They tend to be sweet cravings, even if they're not like a ton of sugar. But in terms of, I guess, less impulsive cravings and more, you know, what my body asks me to eat, it's interesting because I notice now more than before that it's increasingly seasonal. You know, I've always kind of craved red meat in the winter, and then, you know, light meat in the summer, that kind of thing. But now that I'm growing my own food and getting my hands in the dirt, and I have more conscious knowledge of what's in season when, I'm subconsciously craving it when it's in season. So I crave lettuce in the spring and in the fall, not so much in the summer. I crave those winter squashes in the fall and in the winter, and not so much in spring and summer. So as my conscious understanding of how the food cycles work is evolving, my you know, what my body's asking me to eat is changing too, which I guess I kind of expected to some level, but also I'm surprised how strong it is.
That's really cool, actually. See, when I think of craving things, I think of craving things from when I was a kid, where I'm like, okay, give me some Oreos. I need some Oreos. Or Cheez-Its or things like that, like prepared foods, processed foods. That's usually what my cravings are for, and I can usually satisfy it in some other way. But yeah, I don't really buy that stuff unless it's for a special occasion. But I'm also curious, do you ever crave like going out to eat to specific restaurants, or has that kind of faded because you've honed your cooking and you're happy with how you cook?
You know, every once in a while I'll get to a point where I, you know, typically on a Sunday night or something, where I'm like, I don't want to cook dinner. But it's a function of being tired. It's not a function of craving going out to eat anywhere. And that's never been really strong for me. So it's not necessarily a change, but if it ever was there to any extent, it's definitely less now. Has it changed for you?
I think it's more of the panic sets in that I don't have. The panic sets in that I only have ingredients and I'm not about to make something for dinner. It's like a fail-safe. Like I have to eat dinner. We need to go get Domino's. We need to go get Waffle House or something like that. I don't really crave, for the most part, I don't really crave going out to restaurants anymore because I like my food. I like the food that I make. I've tailored it to myself. I've tailored it to Taylor. So we make food how we like it. And I feel like with how much we make homemade food, going to a restaurant really isn't satisfying anymore in the same way as it used to be. Like, I can't just go to Olive Garden and be really happy like I used to be when I was 16.
I guess just because I didn't grow up, I grew up in an ingredient household, not a snacks household. So, you know, I never had the Cheez-Its in the pantry and all that fun stuff. Or if it was there, it was hidden from me so that the adults could enjoy it after the kids went to bed. But yeah, I guess just because that was always normal to me, I don't have those nostalgic associations with them. And I'm also getting better about keeping quote unquote fast food around, because I know that I'm going to hit those points where I'm like, I would rather do anything in the world right now then cook dinner. So I'm getting better about doing things like making fresh pasta when I have the energy and will to do it, and putting it in the freezer. And I know that if I'm in a really bad way, I can boil some water, I can throw that in there, I can put some freaking butter or pesto or whatever on top, and I can have a meal that at the end of the day, even though it's pasta, is going to be more nutritious than me, driving into Weaverville and grabbing whatever's open. So I'm setting myself up for more success, and to some extent, like, it's always been kind of normal to me.
Yeah, I think that's part of the process. Like, we're in the middle of that, where we're not quite to the point where we have all this excess time to prepare future meals, like, on a regular basis, where we're, like, consistently setting ourselves up for fast food, in quotations for anybody listening. Homemade fast food is what I'm saying. We're not really to that point yet. Like, I've kind of gotten there. Occasionally I'll get to the point where I can make a few extra things to throw in the freezer and pull out later. But there's so much else going on trying to set up the homestead that you're like, okay, well, I can barely make me a meal tonight, let alone for the next, 6 months. Like 6 months from now, I need to just get myself fed tonight. I don't need to make 7 freezer meals as well. It's a weird place to be, because it's like stuck in the middle where you're like, I have all of this homemade food. It needs to be preserved, but I don't have the time to preserve it in like 6 ways. I have to just put it all in jars right now and figure it out later. I know this is probably not a super common sentiment, but I used to really like going to the grocery store and like grocery shopping, because I would go in college, I would go at like 10 p.m., midnight, and just spend an hour there in the quiet store, get my groceries, wander around, look at all the clearance stuff, just like enjoy myself. And I absolutely do not like going to the grocery store anymore. It overwhelms me. Like, having to get something out of the center aisles stresses me out. We only ever usually go to like the produce, the dairy, the meat, and sometimes the freezer aisle for like vegetarian stuff or like frozen fruit. It was a couple weeks ago when Taylor was getting ready to leave for his trip. He wanted M&M cookies for his trip, and so we had to go down the candy aisle. Oh my goodness, that aisle is so overwhelmingly colorful, and it's packed full of people. It's hard to get around people in the smaller aisles in the middle. I don't know how people do that. I do not like grocery shopping anymore.
You have to leave your cart at the end of the aisle and then just walk up. I cannot go to the grocery store at peak times because I will get so angry. I'm like, people, we live in a society. You stay on, like, treated like a road, treated like you're driving. You stay to the right. You pass other people. You don't park in the middle. You stay aware of your surroundings. Like, what? This should not be new information. we know how to interact with each other. Can we please just have our stuff together for like 30 minutes? Thank you.
Our Walmart, for some reason, always stacks up pallets, like 50-foot long rows down the main aisles. So you have a third of the aisle width. And then the people who are packing like delivery and pickup orders just leave the carts in the middle of the aisles. And so you have to navigate around all of that. And it's very stressful. I'd rather not.
I will go to grocery stores because people have better grocery store etiquette. I'm not kidding. That's one of the reasons that I enjoy shopping at Publix, is because whenever I go to Ingles or if I'm in Walmart, I'm like, I want to punch people in the face right now.
I went to Publix.
Is that too honest? I'm sorry.
No, I feel you. I went to Publix one time. I've literally been there one time. And they wanted $7 for a bag of shredded cheese. And I was like, I'm never coming here again. This is stupid. This should be $2. So.
Yeah, Publix can be expensive for some things, but then cheaper for others. I don't know. It's weird. What about your future food goals now that you're homesteading? What did those look like?
Right now, my main goal is to simplify things in the future. And part of that is building the pantry, not physically, but like, not physically building a pantry, but collecting all of the different ingredients that I want to include in my pantry so that I have things on hand. That simplifies grocery lists a lot. And I just know like I can make whatever I want because I already have most of the stuff for it. I really like, if you watch Farmhouse on Boone, any of her videos, she has a really interesting approach to like meal plans and making meals for her family that I really like the idea of, but I don't necessarily know how to incorporate it with our current state of being. And by that, I mean making vegetarian and not vegetarian meals, and also there only being two of us. Because they're eating a lot of homegrown meat and just like making versatile meals because she can pull out a few cuts of meat, keep them in the fridge to thaw, and turn them into however many things they want, and then they have like 10 people eating it, so you know it's going to get eaten. So I would like to do something like that, but I don't necessarily know how to incorporate it. That is a huge goal for me to figure that out, though. And then along with that, simplifying breads. I want to have a whole bunch of stuff in the freezer that I can just pull from whenever I want on those bulk days when I have time to do that. I would ideally like them to be sourdough things, just because, I don't know, there's an art there that I would like to embrace a little bit more, and I haven't gotten to that point where I can consistently do that yet. And then I also really want to try and move towards more local or homegrown meats, and I've already kind of made that jump a little bit with like helping the neighbors out and trading for meat with them and getting some from local butcher shops and whatnot, but that's another big goal. But if I'm being completely honest, I think my ideal for the simplification would be if Taylor would start eating meat again, and that is not something that's under my control, and it's not something that I want to pressure him to do, but that would make my life a lot easier. Not necessarily a goal, but more of just like, at some point that would be nice. The last thing with the simplification and cohesiveness of like being able to pull from my pantry, I really want to have the dry goods pantry set up, as well as my canned goods, as well as my frozen goods, as well as fresh things coming out of the garden. I think with that, all of that stocked, including the fresh things that I'm pulling out of the garden at any given time of the year, that is just it's such an empowering thing to like know that you have all of this food and you can make so many different things with it, and you don't even have to leave. Like, you don't even have to go to the grocery store. That is something that's really cool to me, and it's a goal, and it's something we're working towards for sure.
For me, I think my biggest goal is to get back to a place where I'm eating what I feel good eating. Right now, I am not eating what I feel good eating. I'm eating what I can manage to get into my body, because eating something is significantly better than eating nothing. I kind of knew that I was going to do that a little bit going into this, but I definitely didn't think that I would be 2.5 years down the road and still in that place. That's for sure. So, I would love to get more protein in my body and consume not necessarily less carbs, but maybe I'll say less like starches and things. Having a decent chunk of my diet be bread and things in that family has never agreed with me personally. Like, I can eat it, but I don't need to eat it for every meal, kind of thing. And, part of the reason that my chicken stores have lasted so long is because thawing a whole frozen chicken and cooking a whole frozen chicken and creating the meals to eat a whole frozen chicken it's a lot. So I'm honestly almost through all of my separated, organized, broken down chickens, and I have pretty much just my whole chickens left. And so if I can get to a place where I'm more consistent with my meals, which ultimately probably looks like getting back to meal planning, meal prepping, because that's the only way that I've really been able to do that when I'm busy, that would be amazing. But also the thought of scheduling a whole day per week to do that feels unreasonable. So I don't know how I'm gonna get there, but it's on the list. So that counts for something, I think. You know, I grow a lot of food, and I have access to a lot of really good food. But if I could figure out a way to get the gardens in healthier condition, because I'm, in my opinion, rehabilitating the space that I'm in. I think I'm making it healthier and more conducive to healthy plants, and in turn, more productive plants. If I could figure out a way to get the garden to a place where it's not bigger, but just more efficient, so that I can put away more tomatoes, I can put away more winter squashes, I can have more things that actually last me the year instead of just growing whatever I can manage to grow and then supplementing the rest. You know, I have no desire to ever be fully self-sufficient. It stresses me out to even think about trying to do that. But where I can, actually growing my vegetables for the year would be really awesome.
As the years go on, part of that is the perennials that you're putting in too. So like your fruit trees and stuff, like that's why that's such a huge thing that people push at the beginning of getting a homestead, is putting in perennials, fruit trees, etc. They're going to produce way more than you could ever imagine using in a year. The productivity there is insane once they get to their peak. I think this is definitely an episode that we're going to have to follow up on in the future and do an updated version once we're a little bit further along into our growing food journey. And anybody who's listening right now, we are curious how your mentality around food has changed since you started growing your own food.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of She Said Homestead. We hope you enjoyed our chat. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to hear from you. Send your homesteading stories to us at shesaidhomestead@gmail.com. We can't wait to share them on the air. To stay connected, follow us on Instagram for updates and sneak peeks at what's coming up next.
If you like video podcasts, make sure you subscribe to the She Said Homestead YouTube channel too. We can't thank you enough for being part of the She Said Homestead community. Until next time, happy homesteading.